Beyond the Red Line, Episode 4. The Butcher Baker, Hunter of the Frozen Wilderness. Alaska has a way of swallowing things. It swallows boot prints in fresh snow. It swallows cars that veer off icy roads. It swallows bodies in rivers that never really thaw. For more than a decade, starting in the early 1970s, the wilderness around Anchorage hid a secret. Women began to disappear from the city's strip of bars, clubs, and truck stops. Dancers, escorts, sex workers, runaways. Most were young, many were poor. Some were never even reported missing. Their bodies would later be found scattered across river bars, gravel pits, and remote game trails, if they were found at all. Behind those vanishings was a man who seemed as ordinary as they come, a soft-spoken baker, a church-going family man, and a record-setting hunter. His name was Robert Christian Hansen. The media would call him the Butcher Baker. Tonight, on Beyond the Red Line, we go into the cold, into his childhood, his double life, his hunting grounds, and the story of the teenage sex worker who slipped out of his hands and brought his empire of ice crashing down. Robert Christian Hansen was born on February 15, 1939, in the small town of Esterville, Iowa, to Christian and Edna Hansen. His father was a Danish immigrant and a strict, demanding baker. From a young age, Robert's life revolved around two things: the bakery and humiliation. His father forced him to work long pre-dawn shifts, then go straight to school. He struggled socially, plagued by a severe stutter and cystic acne that left his face scarred. Girls ignored him. Boys bullied him. He grew up feeling small, angry, and powerless. But there was one place he felt in control: outside. He became obsessed with hunting. Alone in fields and woods, armed with a rifle and a bow, he finally had power over something. Animals didn't laugh at him. They went where he told them to go. They died when he pulled the trigger. By his early 20s, that resentment had hardened into something uglier. On December 7th, 1960, 21-year-old Hansen, then a volunteer fireman, set fire to a school bus garage in Pocahontas, Iowa, destroying several buses in what appears to have been an act of revenge against the town that mocked him. He was convicted of arson and sentenced to 3 years in prison, but served only about 20 months before being released. Psychological evaluations at the time described him as having an infantile personality and significant mental health problems. His first wife divorced him while he was inside. In 1963, he remarried. By 1967, he made the move that would define the rest of his life. He left Iowa for Anchorage, Alaska. In the late 1960s and 1970s, Anchorage was transforming. Pipeline construction and oil money were flooding the state. Workers, mostly men, poured into the city, doubling Anchorage's population in about a decade. With that influx came a certain ecology of nightlife. Fourth Avenue and the surrounding streets grew crowded with cheap motels, topless bars, massage parlors, and street-based sex work. Women from the lower 48, from native villages, from broken homes and foster care. They drifted north, chasing jobs, and ended up dancing for tips or selling sex to survive. People disappeared in Alaska all the time, fell through ice, got lost hunting, died in small plane crashes. When a sex worker vanished, it was even easier for the city to shrug and say, "She probably moved on." Into that boomtown, Robert Hansen stepped quietly. He opened a small bakery in Anchorage, became known for his pastries, and earned a reputation as a hardworking, if awkward, family man. He married, had 2 children, went to church, joined a local hunting club. Several of his bow hunting kills were entered into world record books, and he proudly displayed his trophies around town. To neighbors, he was just Bob the Baker. To his hunting buddies, he was deadly accurate. And to the women on 4th Avenue, he was just another customer with glasses and a stutter. Hansen's violence against women didn't begin in the wilderness. It began in the city, and the system had more than one chance to stop him. In December 1971, he was arrested in Anchorage for kidnapping and assaulting a housewife at gunpoint, forcing her into his car and threatening to kill her. Around the same time, he was accused of raping a sex worker at gunpoint. Prosecutors cut a deal. The rape charge, involving the sex worker, was dropped. Hansen pled no contest to assault with a deadly weapon in the housewife's case. He was sentenced to 5 years, but served only about 6 months, then was transferred to a halfway house and soon released. In 1976, he was arrested again, this time for stealing a chainsaw from a Fred Meyer store, a felony theft. He received another 5-year sentence, was diagnosed with bipolar disorder, and again got out early after an appeal. Each time the pattern repeated: violence, a light sentence, and a quick return to the community. The housewife had been believed just enough to put him away briefly. The sex worker's case vanished in a plea bargain. No one connected these incidents to something larger. Meanwhile, women on Anchorage's strip kept disappearing. On July 21, 1980, workers installing power lines along a remote road near Eklutna Lake, northeast of Anchorage, saw something that didn't belong. Partially buried in a shallow grave was the skeleton of a young woman. She had been stabbed in the back. There were no clothes that could identify her. No missing persons file clearly matched. She became known only as Eklutna Ani, named for the place where she was found. Years later, Hansen would admit she was one of his victims, saying he thought she was either a topless dancer or a sex worker. He couldn't remember which. He told troopers she was probably his first murder. Whether that's true or not, she was the first that police could tie to him. More women followed. In September 1982, the partially buried remains of Sherry Morrow, a 23-year-old dancer who'd disappeared from an Anchorage club the previous year, were found on the Nick River sandbars. In September 1983, hunters stumbled upon the body of Paula Goulding, another dancer, similarly buried near the Nick River. Other remains surfaced near lakes, gravel pits, and old mining roads throughout the Matanuska-Susitna Valley. Some victims were identified: Joanna Messina, Delynn Sugar Frey, Angela Feddern, Teresa Watson, Sue Luna, and others, most with ties to Anchorage's bars and sex work scene. Others remained anonymous for decades. One victim, dubbed Horseshoe Harriet, wasn't identified until 2021, when DNA revealed she was Robin Pelkey, who had vanished in her teens in the early 1980s. By 1983, law enforcement knew they had a serial killer targeting women connected to the city's red light district. They just didn't know who or how he was getting away with it. When the truth finally came out, the method sounded like something from a horror film. According to Hansen's later confessions, his routine went like this. He cruised 4th Avenue and the surrounding streets, looking for women who were working. Dancers just off shift, escorts, street-based sex workers. He offered cash for sex or for a private date, sometimes flashing large sums of money to gain trust. Once she was in his car, he would pull a gun. Some women he drove to his Muldoon neighborhood home, where his wife and kids were often gone or asleep. Down in his unfinished basement, described by survivors as cold, bare, and outfitted with chains, he raped and assaulted them. If he decided to let them live, he might release them back into town and threaten them into silence. If he decided they were going to die, he escalated. He would handcuff or bind his victim, then drive to Merrill Field, a small Anchorage airstrip where he kept his Piper Super Cub bush plane. He loaded guns, knives, and gear into the plane while the woman waited, terrified, in the back. Then he'd fly her out over the river valleys and braided channels that only skilled bush pilots could navigate. He landed on gravel bars near the Kneek River, around remote lakes, or in the Matanuska Valley, places with no roads, no witnesses, and no easy way out. There, he would force her from the plane, often strip her naked and remove her shoes, so running was nearly impossible on the sharp rocks and brush. Then he'd let her go, not to free her, to create a game. Armed with a Ruger Mini 14 rifle and a hunting knife, Hansen stalked the fleeing woman through the trees and tundra like he might track a caribou or a bear, toying with her, firing shots, closing in when he was ready. To him, as he later chillingly implied to investigators, out in the wilderness, they were just another animal. To them, it was the last, cruelest chapter of a life that society had already decided didn't matter. On June 13th, 1983, just after dawn, 17-year-old Cindy Paulson, a dancer and sex worker, stood barefoot on 6th Avenue in Anchorage, wearing nothing but a sweatshirt and a pair of handcuffs. Cars passed her, some slowing, some speeding up. Eventually, a driver, a passing trucker, stopped. At a nearby motel, Cindy told police a story that should have ended Hansen's career years earlier. She said, the night before, a small, bespectacled man with a stutter picked her up, offering $200 for oral sex. Once she was in his car, he pulled a gun and handcuffed her. He took her to a house, later confirmed as Hansen's, where he chained her by the neck to a post in his basement and raped and tortured her for hours. Eventually, he forced her back into his car and told her they were going to his cabin by the river. They drove to Merrill Field. While he loaded his plane, she was left alone, hands still cuffed in front of her in the back seat of his car. Cindy noticed he'd left the back door unlocked. She made a decision. She flung the door open and ran, across the gravel, across the tarmac, out toward the road, barefoot, handcuffed, trying not to look back in case he raised the gun. She also left something behind. Her blue sneakers, deliberately kicked off and left on the floorboard of the car as evidence she'd been there. At almost the same time, a security officer at Merrill Field wrote down the license plate number of a suspicious car parked by a small plane. That plate would later trace back to Robert Hansen. Cindy described her attacker in detail: a middle-aged white man, about 5 feet 6 inches, thinning hair, glasses, stutter, avid hunter, small plane owner. Police brought Hansen in for questioning. He admitted he'd met Cindy, but claimed she was trying to extort him, that the sex had been consensual, and that she was just a lying prostitute. He provided a friend as an alibi. Some officers were inclined to believe him, but one trooper was not. Alaska State Trooper Glenn Floth had been investigating the bodies turning up around the Nick River and the Matsu Valley. Cindy's story lined up too perfectly with his unsolved cases to ignore it. He dug into Hansen's history and found the arson conviction in Iowa, the 1970s assault and abduction cases, the early releases, the theft conviction, and the pattern of violence against women that hadn't gone away. Flotha reached out to the FBI Behavioral Science Unit in Quantico. Profiler John Douglas helped construct a profile of the killer dumping bodies in Alaska, a man who felt socially inadequate, had a history of being bullied and rejected by women, overcompensated through hobbies like hunting, appeared mild-mannered and respectable, probably had an occupation that let him blend into the community. Robert Hansen fit almost every line. With Cindy's testimony, the Merrill Field plate, and the emerging profile, troopers finally had enough to push for search warrants. On October 27, 1983, police executed coordinated raids on Hansen's home, bakery, cars, and his small plane. What they found tore open the case. Inside his house, they discovered a hidden crawlspace in the attic containing jewelry, necklaces, rings, and trinkets later identified as belonging to missing women. Numerous firearms, including a Ruger Mini 14 rifle, similar to one that had fired bullets found near victims. And, hidden behind the headboard in his bedroom, an aviation map of the Anchorage area. On that map were 37 tiny X marks, scattered across isolated river bars, lakes, and remote ridges. Many of those X's matched existing body recovery sites. Others pointed to places no one had searched yet. It was, effectively, a scorecard. Confronted with the evidence, Hansen initially denied everything, then slowly, methodically, began to break. Alaska had no death penalty. The worst sentence available was life in prison. Prosecutors made Hansen an offer: plead guilty to several murders and to the kidnapping and rape of Cindy Paulson, cooperate fully with investigators, help locate remains at his marked sites, and they would limit the number of formal murder charges. He agreed. Over days of taped interviews, Hansen, in a soft, almost bored voice, described abducting women from 4th Avenue, taking them home, then flying them into the wilderness to chase and kill them. He admitted to 17 murders and more than 30 rapes, though authorities believe he may have killed 20 to 21 women or more, based on missing persons reports and the map. He then led troopers back out into the landscape he had used as his playground. They flew by helicopter and small plane to X after X on the map, digging where he pointed. In many places, they found human remains, often just bones, scraps of clothing, and jewelry scattered by animals and weather. Some families finally got answers, others never did. Even in confession, Hansen minimized his responsibility, giving short, clinical answers. He blamed the women. He implied that sex workers couldn't really be raped, a sentiment investigators later quoted as revealing his complete lack of empathy. The hunting trophies on his walls and the X's on his map told the real story. On February 18th, 1984, Robert Hansen stood in court and pled guilty to 4 counts of first-degree murder in the cases of Sherry Morrow, Paula Goulding, Joanna Messina, and the still unidentified Eklutna Annie, along with the kidnapping and rape of Cindy Paulson. In exchange for his cooperation, the state did not individually prosecute him for every murder he'd admitted, but the judge made sure his sentence reflected the true scope of damage. Hansen was given 461 years plus life, without the possibility of parole. He first served time in federal facilities outside Alaska, then was eventually transferred back to Spring Creek Correctional Center in Seward. On August 21st, 2014, at age 75, Hansen died in an Anchorage hospital while still in custody. Authorities said he had likely killed as many as 21 women. The man who loved the open sky and remote rivers spent his last decades surrounded by concrete and steel. Looking back, it's easy to say the signs were obvious. But the real story of the Butcher Baker isn't just about one man's cruelty. It's about how he was able to keep killing for over a decade. First, there was his double life. By day, he was the unassuming baker with the shy smile and the stutter, the guy who donated pastries and talked about hunting. He seemed harmless, hardworking, even meek. That mask made it hard for community members, and even some officers, to picture him as a violent predator. Second, there were the victims. Most of the women he targeted were dancers, escorts, or street-based sex workers, people living at the very edge of Anchorage's social safety net. Many were transient. Some were estranged from family. Others had addiction issues or no fixed address. When they vanished, there often wasn't a parent or partner calling every day demanding answers. In several cases, no formal missing persons report was ever filed. If no one is officially missing, it's easier for a killer to hide. Third, there was Alaska itself. The landscape gave Hansen natural cover. Bodies left in shallow graves or on sandbars were quickly buried by snow, scattered by animals, or washed away by rivers. Hunters and hikers found bones all the time. Not every skeleton hinted at murder. Death in the outdoors was normal here. He just used that to his advantage. Fourth, there was systemic bias. When a housewife accused him of abducting her, he did a short stretch and walked. When a sex worker accused him of rape, that charge was the one sacrificed in a plea deal. Even in 1983, when Cindy Paulson ran barefoot across an airfield to escape him, some officers initially hesitated to fully believe her, until a persistent trooper pushed the case. Hansen preyed on the very people law enforcement and the courts took least seriously. He counted on their stories being doubted. And for years, that worked. Even with Hansen long dead, parts of his story remain unfinished. Some investigators suspect he may have killed earlier than he ever admitted, possibly connected to the disappearances of Megan Emmerich, who vanished from Anchorage in 1973, or other young women whose cases line up with his movements. He repeatedly denied certain murders when confronted, and with many potential victims reduced to bones, conclusive proof is hard to come by. There are still unidentified women linked to his hunting grounds, girls and women who left behind no paper trail, no dental records, no family DNA to match. As forensic technology improves, more names may be restored to those crosses in remote Alaskan cemeteries, the way Robin Pelkey finally reclaimed her name after 37 years as Horseshoe Harriet. There are also the unknown survivors, women he abducted, assaulted, then released. Some spoke up, others likely stayed silent, convinced no one would believe a sex worker over a respectable business owner. And then there's the question everyone asks when they hear this story. Could he have been stopped sooner? If that first arson sentence had been fully served, if the rape charge had gone to trial, if the pattern of violence against women had been taken as seriously as shoplifting and theft, how many X's on that map might never have been drawn? Robert Hansen liked to see himself as a hunter, out in the wild, with a rifle in his hands and someone running in front of him. He finally felt bigger than the world that had once mocked him. But the truth is, he only hunted women the world had already decided were expendable. Dancers who went by stage names, sex workers who got paid in cash, runaways whose families had lost track of them, indigenous and out-of-state women who left few footprints on paper. He chose victims whose lives existed beyond the red line, outside the area where society actively keeps count. Cindy Paulson changed that. Barefoot, handcuffed, and terrified, she ran off his map and into a world that, for once, listened. Her escape forced the system to look at a man it wanted to believe was harmless, and at the women it had largely ignored. Today, Hansen is dead. His bakery is gone. His trophies gather dust in evidence rooms. But the places where he hunted are still there. River bars, gravel pits, stands of scrub willow where snow piles up in winter and melts into muddy spring. When we tell these stories, we're not just talking about a killer. We're talking about priorities, about who gets believed, about which lives we decide are worth a full investigation, and which we let disappear into the trees. This is Beyond the Red Line. And tonight, you've walked through the frozen hunting grounds of the butcher baker, a man who treated women as game, and a world that for far too long made that easy.